Hello there, you're watching All 24 News International Channel. I'm your host, Greenfield Zachary, and these are tonight's top stories. In Gaza, dozens have been killed and many others wounded in yet another brutal Israeli attack. The UN reports over 100 children have died from hunger, while 24 European countries call for an end to the starvation crisis. And in Sudan, dead and wounded after a bombing by the Rapid Support Forces in West Kordofan. Meanwhile, talks are underway to strengthen security and political ties between Sudan and South Sudan. Also in our news, as international efforts ramp up to break Libya's political deadlock, the Government of National Unity reveals a new plan to end the weapons chaos, declaring the militia rule in Tripoli is over. And later on, Kiev denies reports of a Russian breach near Potrovsk as intensive diplomatic talks continue ahead of the Alaska summit. Zelensky expresses doubts about reaching an agreement without Ukraine, accusing Moscow of preparing new attacks. All these and more shortly. Hello again and welcome back to the program. First off in our news, dozens of Palestinians were killed and others injured in Zionist airstrikes targeting various areas of the Gaza Strip since dawn on Tuesday. According to local Palestinian sources, occupation aircrafts carried out airstrikes targeting several areas in the Gaza Strip, killing 71 people and wounding many more others.
This is my sister, and this is her husband. The building was full of residents. My nephew was present there, and he was seriously injured. I call on the whole world to stand with my nephew. He's injured in his leg and can't move it. His whole face is wounded. You have to send him to doctors because there are no doctors, no medicine, no hospitals, and there is no bed for patients or the wounded. The world must intervene. This can't go on. Every day we die. Every day we lose loved ones.
And in the same context, 28 Palestinians were killed and several others injured early Tuesday morning in a Zionist massacre targeting several residential buildings in the Zaytun neighborhood east of Gaza City. Local sources reported that the eastern and southern areas of the city were subjected to renewed aerial and artillery bombardment. Meanwhile, the Palestinian Ministry of Health in the Gaza Strip announced on Tuesday that the number of martyrs from starvation has risen to 5, including 2 children, over the last 24 hours alone, due to famine and malnutrition caused by the occupation's aggression and blockade of the Strip. In a press statement, the ministry noted that the total number of victims of famine and malnutrition has risen to 227 martyrs, including 103 children.
الحليب أثر عليه والله يرحمه كيف معين وحليب معين وجو أكل معين ومش كيف الطفل ليش بده يتحمل لما يتحمل الطفل.
For their part, United Nations humanitarian agencies are urgently calling for action following a devastating report from Gaza. Medical sources have confirmed that over 100 children have died from malnutrition since the start of the ongoing genocide. The UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs describes the tragic toll as catastrophic, saying it tarnishes the world's reputation and demands immediate response. Meanwhile, the World Food Programme warns that more than 300,000 children in Gaza are at critical risk. And in international reactions, in a joint statement released Tuesday, the foreign ministers of 24 European countries, along with European commissioners, called on the Zionist entity to urgently address the worsening famine in Gaza. They emphasized the need for humanitarian aid to be delivered without political interference, warning that the scale of suffering in Gaza has reached unprecedented levels. The statement urged the entity to allow unrestricted access for international aid organizations to help those in dire need. For his part, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has condemned the killing of 6 Palestinian journalists in an Israeli airstrike on Gaza City this past Sunday. His spokesperson, Stefan Dujarric, confirmed that Guterres has called for an independent investigation into their deaths. Guterres also reiterated the urgent need to protect journalists and media professionals, stressing they must be allowed to do their work freely without fear or prejudice. Since the war began, over 240 Palestinian journalists have lost their lives.
I can tell you that the Secretary General condemns the killing of the 6 Palestinian journalists in an Israeli airstrike in Gaza City on August 10th. These latest killings highlight the extreme risks that journalists continue to face when covering this ongoing conflict. The Secretary General calls for an independent and impartial investigation into these latest killings. At least 242 journalists have been killed in Gaza since the war began. Journalists and media workers must be respected, they must be protected, and they must be allowed to carry out their work freely, free from fear and free from harassment.
Meanwhile, the Palestinian Foreign Ministry slammed the international community's failure to stop the genocide against the Palestinian people. In a statement on Tuesday, they criticized world governments and institutions for not enforcing international humanitarian law. Despite widespread calls, the ministry says that the Israeli occupation continues its aggression, using starvation, thirst, and denial of medical care as weapons, while the global community remains unable to halt this blatant disregard for human rights and UN resolutions. And finally, in our file, the Norwegian Foreign Ministry announced it will enforce an arrest warrant against Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu if he sets foot on Norwegian soil. Deputy Foreign Minister Andreas Kravek also revealed that Norway's sovereign wealth fund, the world's largest, has sold off its investment in 11 Israeli companies. He emphasized that Norway refuses to be complicit in what it calls genocidal crimes against the Palestinian people. All right, moving on to another development, but this time in Africa. In Sudan, several people were killed and others injured after shelling by the Rapid Support Forces in El Kawi, West Kordofan state, according to local emergency officials. The RSF also targeted a gathering in the Nishribu area, killing 4 and seriously wounding others. Officials say the violence erupted after citizens refused to hand over money to the RSF, who tried to confiscate it by force. In this context, the United Nations has expressed deep concern over the ongoing violence in Sudan's Kordofan region. Just last week, Rapid Support Forces attacked villages in North Kordofan, killing 18 civilians and injuring dozens near Kuraidam, close to Al Obeid. UN spokesperson Stefan Dujarric condemned the attacks, urging all parties to stop targeting civilians and uphold their obligations under international humanitarian law. Meanwhile, Sudan's deputy chairman of the Transitional Sovereignty Council, Malik Agar, met with South Sudan's President Salva Kiir to discuss strengthening bilateral relations and boosting strategic partnerships for the benefit of both nations. Sudan's ambassador to South Sudan, Issam Karar, said the talks focused on enhancing cooperation, particularly by activating joint ministerial committees on political and security issues, while addressing shared concerns between the two peoples. Elsewhere in Africa, the Libyan government of national unity has outlined 3 key steps to end what it calls the chaos of weapons outside the state or state control. Speaking at a graduation ceremony for military students in Tripoli on Monday, marking the 85th anniversary of the Libyan army, Prime Minister Abdulhamid Dbeibeh said the government is focused on supporting professional regular army, dismantling outlaw armed groups, and maintaining stability across the entire country.
In this government, we are moving forward along 3 paths in a balanced and precise manner, supporting our national army and professional institutions, ending the presence of gangs and armed groups operating outside the law, and maintaining the stability we have established and preserved despite all attempts to undermine it. Today, we extend our hand to all those who stand with the state and its institutions, and we pledge nothing but firmness and resolve in confronting anyone who chooses to stand as an obstacle to the future of Libya and its people.
In the same context, Dbeibeh stressed that Libya's stability will only be achieved through a single unified army operating under the rule of law, noting that his government has overcome the most difficult stages of what he called the chaos of weapons outside the state's authority.
Experience has shown that a nation's stability depends on a single, united army operating under the rule of law and guided by the doctrine of protecting the homeland and its citizens. Such a professional army, accountable solely of the authority of the state, is not a choice but a firm national duty we uphold without hesitation. Our battle to end the presence of weapons outside the authority of the state is ongoing, and we have passed through the most difficult stages. What remains ahead is, by the grace of God and the will of the Libyan people, and through the determination of these men, the easiest part. There is no path forward except for the authority of the state alone to govern all its sovereign institutions, from ports to airports to military bases, without exception.
In his speech, the head of the Libyan government of national unity stressed that the time when Tripoli was described as being under the rule of military is over, noting that his government extends its hand to all who believe in the state and its institutions, adding that the state will not tolerate anyone who hampers the country's future.
The time when our country or our capital was described as a land of militias has passed and faded away. Together we are turning this bleak page in our nation's history toward a safe state where the rule of law and law alone prevails. Fellow graduates, the strength of a state is not measured by words, but by its ability to enforce the law and safeguard sovereignty. Today we are more determined than ever for our institutions to have the decision-making power and the final say, and for our regular army to remain the shield that protects the nation and its citizens.
The High National Elections Commission has condemned an armed assault on its Electoral Administration office in Slyton, describing it as a flagrant violation of the sanctity of the Commission and the values of civil governance, and also the aspirations of Libyan voters for democracy and stability. In a statement issued on Tuesday, the Commission labeled the incident a barbaric act that infringes on citizens' right to choose their representatives in municipal councils. Still with Libya, the United Nations Support Mission in the country and the High Council of the State agreed on the need to exert efforts to overcome the political stalemate and move the country towards stability. According to the Libyan news agency, this came during a meeting between the special representative of the Secretary General of the United Nations, Hannah Tete, and the President of the High Council of State, Mohammed Takala, in the capital Tripoli, where she briefed him on the mission's efforts to communicate with Libyans to ensure a comprehensive Libyan-led political process. Moving on to another development now, Spanish media outlets have highlighted the dangerous attempts of dozens of Moroccans of all ages and even entire families to migrate to Ceuta in the Spanish enclave. According to these outlets, this reflects a deepening social tragedy that the Makhzen regime is determined to exacerbate by using migrants as a means of pressure against Europe and Spain in particular.
The situation on the ground is now close to a humanitarian emergency, with almost no day in August passing without swimming attempts, placing heavy strain on Spanish security forces and shelters. The tragedy does not end at the border but begins there, as families and children who fail to cross are deported to distant Moroccan cities with no guarantees for their safety or future.
Moving on to another topical development, the Ukrainian army denied reports of a Russian forces breach into the front line near the cities of Pokrovsk and Dubrovaya in eastern Ukraine. The Dnipro Land Forces group responsible for this sector stated on Telegram late Monday evening that the infiltration of Russian groups did not mean the control of territory. Ukrainian military sources had previously reported that the Russian forces had advanced more than 10 kilometers northeast of the city of Pokrovsk in Donetsk. Meanwhile, Ukrainian police announced on Tuesday that 3 people were killed and 12 others were wounded in Russian attacks on Donetsk. The region's Tactical Operations Group, which oversees parts of the front in the industrial area, stated that the recent Russian attacks are part of Moscow's attempts to test Ukrainian lines, describing the battles as complex, disruptive, and dynamic. Still with the Russia-Ukraine file, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky accused Russia on Tuesday of preparing to carry out new operations in his country, ahead of an upcoming summit between Russian President Vladimir Putin and US President Donald Trump. In a statement posted on social media, Zelensky asserted that Moscow does not seek peace in Ukraine and is instead preparing to carry out new attacks, as he put it.
So far, there is no indication whatsoever that Russians have received signals to prepare for a post-war situation. On the contrary, they are moving their troops and forces in such a way as to launch new offensive operations.
In America's coldest state, talks between the US, Russia, and Ukraine may offer a chance to ease tensions and end the war in Ukraine. But President Zelensky remains doubtful, insisting Ukraine must be part of any agreement. Meanwhile, the fighting rages on, with both sides reporting heavy military actions. Let's follow the report on this topic by Nabil Khazini.
It is here in America's coldest state, Alaska, that the long-standing frost between Washington and Moscow may finally begin to melt, serving as a reminder of how geographically close the two countries are and hinting at the possibility of improving their strained relationship and finally work toward ending the war in Ukraine. But will this be the moment? The Ukrainian president appears a bit skeptical, emphasizing that achieving peace in Ukraine is not possible without his country's involvement.
As for the negotiations, in any case, they are important at the leadership level, but it is impossible to talk about Ukraine without Ukraine. and no one will accept that. So the conversation between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump may be important for their bilateral track. But they cannot agree on anything about Ukraine without us. I truly believe and hope that the US president understands and realizes that.
The White House reports that Trump is also seeking to arrange a trilateral meeting with Putin and Zelensky. However, the Kremlin raises doubts about Zelensky's ability to sign any binding agreements, given that his term ended last year. On the ground, the war is still raging. Russia says its air defense unit shut down 179 Ukrainian drones over several areas in the past 24 hours, while Ukraine says Russian forces have made rapid gains in a narrow but crucial section of the front line.
And in another story, China and the United States announced an extension of the suspension of tariffs for an additional 90 days, just hours before the expiration of the trade truce between Washington and Beijing. US President Donald Trump announced the signing of an executive order postponing the reimposition of the heavy tariffs on Chinese products until November 10th, pending an agreement before that date. Similarly, South Africa's Trade Minister Park Tau announced his country's intention to submit a new trade offer to the United States in an attempt to mitigate the 30% tariffs imposed by Washington last week on Pretoria's exports. During a press conference, Tau explained that the cabinet approved the new offer as a basis for future negotiations with the U.S. He added that the proposal largely takes into account the observation contained in the U.S. national trade estimates for 2025, which identified gaps and obstacles in South Africa's trade dealings with the United States.
With regards to continued engagements with the U.S. to secure a deal and reduce the tariffs, Cabinet has approved that South Africa submits a revised offer as a basis for negotiations with the U.S. The new offer builds on the previous offer submitted in May 2025. The new offer substantively responds to the issues the U.S. has raised in the 2025 National Trade Estimates Report.
And finally, to conclude our news bulletin, drought affected 52% of European lands and Mediterranean coasts in July for the fourth consecutive month, according to or from the European Drought Observatory. This is the highest percentage recorded for July since records began in 2012. Osama Ayadi tells us more.
Europe has recorded the highest level of drought since 2012, with 52% of the continent's land area affected, according to data from the European Drought Observatory. This crisis has hit Eastern Europe and the Balkans particularly hard, leading to heightened alert levels in Hungary, Kosovo, and Bosnia and Herzegovina. The drought, which has persisted for 4 consecutive months, has been exacerbated by prolonged heat waves, triggering widespread wildfires across the region. Severe fire outbreaks caused forced evacuations and significant damage to large areas. The Copernicus Drought Index classified the drought into 3 levels: watch, warning, and alert, and the percentage of land under alert status surged dramatically in several Eastern European and Balkan nations.
Climate change is the main driver of heat waves, and that's the evidence for that is overwhelming. There is no doubt about that. We have done tons of observations. We have models, everything agrees. The scientific consensus is overwhelming and is decisive.
The heat waves sweeping the Balkans since early summer have not only intensified drought conditions, but also fueled a record number of forest fires. Many of these fires have been exacerbated by illegal landfills, which emit toxic fumes and gases when ignited, posing additional health and environmental risks. The Mediterranean coasts have also been severely impacted, compounding the challenge for agriculture, water resources, and ecosystems.
We're looking at heat waves becoming more and more frequent, more intense, happening over longer periods of time in the year. So summer is going to feel longer, and we're looking in some places at heat waves of 40, 45 degrees, almost 50 degrees temperature, probably more than that in the next 20 years.
As Europe grapples with the escalating climate crisis, experts warn that such extreme weather events have become more frequent and severe. Governments and communities are being urged to implement long-term strategies to mitigate the efforts of drought and wildfires while addressing underlying issues such as illegal waste disposal and climate change.
Well, that wraps up tonight's news. For more updates, you can always visit our social media platforms as well as our website. Thank you for watching and take care.